Believe it or not, the Atlanta Hawks are actually investing in the Sacramento Kings by trading them Kevin Huerter. And is Kevin Huerter the favorite to be the starting two guard? I'm joined by Brad Rowland, host of the Locked On Hawks, to talk about this trade right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. They have you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports producer and reporter for ABC 10 News in Sacramento. And I apologize if you're a normal listener of me and you think, Matt, you sound a little bit congested. I am dealing with a little bit of a bug here, but I'm getting over it. I'm going to be fine because on Friday, I'm hopping on a plane. I'm heading to Las Vegas. I'm going to be at Summer League. Very excited about that. We'll be bringing you some unique Locked On Kings content from Summer League in Las Vegas. And if you're going to Summer League in Vegas, I would love to be able to see you. So just nursing a bit of a congestion, bit of a cold here. Nothing COVID related. We're doing fine. But if you hear me breathing through my mouth or if you hear sniffles every once in a while, I apologize about that. But I'm excited to have Brad Rowland here on Locked On Kings today. He and I definitely had to schedule doing this interview together following the Kevin Huerter trade. And there's a really interesting conversation here because we're also going to talk about why the Kings and the Hawks made this trade, specifically why the Hawks were willing to give up the better player in the deal and also take back a draft pick that is as heavily protected as it is, or as the pick is that the Kings sent back to Atlanta. I said there in the introduction, and Brad and I are going to discuss this, Atlanta is really investing in the Sacramento Kings by making this move. We'll explain that. Plus, Brad and I are going to discuss really the meat and potatoes of what I wanted to discuss, which is whether or not Brad thinks that Kevin Huerter is most optimized as a two guard or as a three. If he's a three, he's more than likely backing up Harrison Barnes. If he's a two, then he and Malik Monk are battling for the starting two guard spot. You could throw Davion Mitchell in there, I guess, if you wanted to in training camp. And I personally think at this point in time that Kevin Huerter should be the favorite to be the starting two guard, even with the history between De'Aaron Fox and Malik Monk in their time at Kentucky. So we're going to hear, you're going to hear Brad and I discuss that. Brad and I discuss how the Hawks are investing in the Kings. And we're also going to discuss what the Hawks got, getting Mo Harkless, which is kind of a throwaway into this deal, and Justin Holiday, who the Atlanta Hawks actually see value in. So that's all going to be in this conversation. I hope you enjoy it right here on Locked On Kings. It has been a busy offseason, to say the absolute least, for both the Sacramento Kings and the Atlanta Hawks, who are once again trade partners. It seems like the Kings and the Hawks always find ways to work out deals together. I'm Matt George, host of the Locked On Kings podcast, joined by Brad Rowland, host of the Locked On Hawks podcast. And Brad, here we are again. Can't tell you how many times we've done crossover episodes talking about hypothetical trades, especially conversations about John Collins. And it sounded like the Kings and the Hawks, there's a very good chance for a trade to go down involving John Collins, but there was a trade. John was not involved. Instead, Kevin Huerter comes to Sacramento. The Hawks get a couple of pieces plus a first-round pick. Were you as surprised as I was to see that notification from Woj and not see John Collins involved in that deal?
Yeah, a little bit. I think that if the odds were out there that you and I'd be talking about a trade that actually happened, it would have involved John more often than not, I think. But also, the deal that actually happened, is we'll sort of get into, didn't shock me necessarily. Is one of those constructions where I know you and I talked about this either online or offline about, Justin Holiday making some sense for the Hawks. Is this kind of plug and play piece? And Huerter was very available because of the DeJounte Murray trade and the Hawks having so much at two. So yeah, I mean, taking a step back, it's not shocking, but certainly I would have bet on a Kings trade in a vacuum involving John Collins.
My timeline for this entire thing was really interesting, Brad, because we found out the Sacramento Kings weren't offering the qualifying offer to Dante DiVincenzo, which I was not a fan fan of. I was like, well, it didn't make any sense to me, especially they pursued DiVincenzo in 2 separate trades, finally got him on the second one. I thought for sure DiVincenzo was going to stick around. So I'm disappointed by that. Then the news comes out of the Hawks trading for DeJounte Murray. And I believe, okay, now Kevin Huerter is available. Maybe the Sacramento Kings are now trying to do some kind of package deal involving both Collins and Huerter. Then they end up just getting Huerter, who's arguably more needed out of the two of them. It's crazy, the series of events that leads up to trades like this during the offseason, because one move from any team in the league can just change the trajectory of potential negotiations.
Yeah, it really can. And even beyond that, like, the Kings getting Keegan Murray might have closed the door, at least some, on John Collins too. That was part of this. I mean, they still have Harrison Barnes on the roster. I think he probably would have had to come to the Hawks in any kind of deal for Collins. Yeah, there's all these moving pieces, and the same thing for the Hawks. Like, I think Huerter was already going to be available on some level because most guys on this roster were available coming into the offseason. But you go get Murray, who is going to play some point guard as well, but he's going to start at the 2, and that was the logical thing. And Bogdanovich is still on this roster for the Hawks, a guy that the Kings I know were familiar with very closely. But they had to they didn't necessarily have to move one of Huerter or Bogdanovich, but having those guys both off the bench behind Murray, it's just a curious allocation of resources to have all that kind of firepower at the same position, even if they can kind of play both wing spots. So certainly an interesting setup for this deal, and I think at the end of the day, not a shocking result, but still one that took some stuff along the way to happen.
How do you assess the value of what both sides got? Because the Sacramento, I'm happy with the haul that the Kings were willing to give up in order to acquire Huerter. I think it's a solid trade for Sacramento's perspective. But from the Atlanta perspective, to get Justin Holiday, who is a role player, Mo Harkless, who can be a role player, and I actually like some of the things that Mo Harkless did for the Kings over the last couple of seasons. And then the big thing was the protected 2024 first round pick. Do you think that was a appropriate haul for Kevin Huerter? You think the Hawks maybe could have gotten a little bit more? Maybe the Kings overpaid. How do you assess that?
Yeah, I don't necessarily love this deal in a vacuum for the Hawks.
Yeah.
Not necessarily because of anything that they're getting back, because honestly, I'm probably higher on Justin Holiday than most people are. I've always liked Justin. I know Hawks fans remember him not being very good the first time around in Atlanta, but he's a different guy now. He's an established rotation player in the NBA. That's what he is. He's a two-way guy, etc. I think really a lot of this comes down to what you care about from the Hawks side, and maybe for the Kings side as well, because the Kings, you're buying on a player that is young and under control for 4 years and helps you from a shooter perspective. There's lots of like from the Kings side. And yeah, you give up a pick for sure. That pick is going to be an interesting part of this trade, which I'm sure we'll get into. But for me, it's unavoidable on the Hawks side that they save money in this trade. And it does feel like that was at least part of the impetus, which you just can't love. If you're a Hawks fan, I know I'm probably a broken record for my listeners, but like, you shouldn't care about Tony Ressler's wallet. It's just something that I just don't think you should care about. But in the reality standpoint of the Hawks potentially trying to avoid the luxury tax, this move does help them there. And for me, I do wonder, and honestly, I almost don't wonder, if this deal was value neutral money-wise, do the Hawks make it? I probably think they probably don't make it. That's my guess. But at the end of the day, it's an appropriate value for Kevin Huerter. If this is a big if that first round pick is a first round pick when it comes. If it's not a first round pick, this is not a good value trade for the Hawks. Does that mean it's a disaster? No. But really the pivot point for me, I wonder if you feel the same way, to kind of put it back on you. Like if this becomes 2 seconds, it's a lot better deal for the Kings. Obviously, it's a lot worse deal for the Hawks. It's not all about that, but that's a huge value swing depending on what happens in 3 or 4 years.
No, I 100% agree with you, because I think the significance of the value that the Hawks got is this first round pick. And I personally had no issue with the Kings trading first rounders. I'm tired of first round picks meaning anything to Sacramento. But also, I understand that Sacramento Kings draft picks might mean more than most other teams' draft picks because of their history of how many times that pick ends up being a lottery pick. That's why I was so surprised with how heavy the protections were on this pick. I mean, it's lottery protected in 2024. The Kings are hoping they will not be in the lottery at that point in time, but they've been hoping that for 16 years. Then it's top 12 protected in 2025. Then it goes back down to top 10 protected in 2026 and then converts into 2 seconds. I know what the Kings fans that I've talked to are, if they're bothered by moving the pick in this trade, it's not that they gave up a pick with heavy protections. It's the fact that until this pick conveys, the Kings can't really trade future first rounders until this pick ends up conveying, which could kind of handcuff the Sacramento Kings in the event that they wanted to make, maybe at this upcoming trade deadline or next offseason, make another kind of big swing move. Let's say the Kings sneak into the playoffs and are now trying to add on to it by adding a big name to maybe replace Harrison Barnes, who's on the final year of his deal. Unless this pick wouldn't convey because it's 2024, they still have their 2023 pick. It's tougher for them to make a move without trading the pick. So I was surprised, Brad, with how significant the protections are there. It felt like a really safe pick for the Sacramento Kings to give up, because if Huerter and their plans right now don't work out by 2024, they're gonna be in the lottery.
Yeah, it's a really interesting construction because on the Kings side, what you don't want to end up having happen here is that you're trading a lottery pick for Kevin Huerter necessarily. Because I think even as someone who's very high on Kevin Huerter, giving up a lottery pick for Kevin Huerter plus Holiday, who had some real value, not a ton, but some value as on his contract. Harkless probably not necessarily a huge plus value, but having that happen would not be the greatest result for the Kings. Now, if it's the 10th pick, not a disaster. If it's the 5th pick, that's obviously pretty bad value for Kevin Huerter, even a guy I like a lot. So I kind of get on the Kings side. The thing is, it kind of showed some urgency on the Hawks side because, we can sort of get into it, and I'll probably ask you later, like what the actual probability is of that pick converting. But like I said, if it's not a first round pick, people might forget about it, 4 or 5 years. I mean, other than the diehards, I won't forget about it. You won't forget about it. But a lot of people might forget about it. The Hawks actually has some pretty recent constructions that are very similar to this. They traded Kyle Korver to Cleveland for a pick that evaporated into 2 seconds. They traded Dennis Schroeder to Oklahoma City and a pick that eventually evaporated into 2 seconds. And you can sell it as a first round pick in the press release, and people don't remember that. And years later, people don't really care, other than the diehards, that it became 2 seconds. So, like, I don't know. It's one of those niche things that's easier to sell on the Hawk side than it maybe is on the King side. But that really does kind of swing the value. It's really interesting to me that they did it that way because, yeah, it is heavily protected. And given, I'm not trying to pile on the Kings, but it's like, if there's one franchise you can't be super, super confident is going to make the playoffs before 2026, it's the Kings, just based on and again, a play-in, a berth in 2026 would do the trick because you pick 11, pick 12, pick 13 are all available, pick 14 as well. But yeah, not exactly a slam dunk. It's not a pick that's definitely going to, quote unquote, definitely going to be a first round pick. And it sort of adds a layer of complexity to the entire thing.
It almost feels like the Hawks are almost investing in the Kings in a way, right? Like they're giving them the better player with the expectation, okay, you need to finally make the postseason, and then we'll take your draft pick as our collateral. We're helping you accomplish your goal, but even then, if it happens next season in 2023, which is the Kings' goal, that doesn't affect at all because it's not the 2023 pick. So,
and that's one of the reasons why this is such a weird evaluation, and why I said the money thing earlier, is because I think the Hawks have to realize that pick may never come, and they have to know that. I'm not saying it's gonna never come, but it's on the table as a possibility. So they're making that deal knowing that's on the table as a potential outcome, and they still did it, which means they either really like Justin Holiday or they really wanted to save money, or both maybe. But I'm not really sure which one it is. But Holiday does fit with them, which I'm sure we'll get into. But it's definitely a nuanced up and down conversation, which people don't necessarily care about. It's like, okay, Kevin Huerter for a first round pick is kind of the deal from the casual fan side. And I get that that's appropriate value too.
It makes you think about what other potential value was on the table for Kevin Huerter, if that was the best deal or if that was what the Hawks thought made the most sense going forward. Maybe it wasn't the best short-term deal for them, but it had the chance to be the most lucrative with a first-round pick in the future, and they were willing to take that gamble. But I actually wanted to ask you specifically about Kevin Huerter's role and position in your mind with the Sacramento Kings. I know he played a lot of time actually at the 3 in Atlanta. I look at him as the guy who more than likely will fill the starting 2 spot in Sacramento. However, before the Kings made this move for Huerter, they signed Malik Monk in free agency, who's the former teammate of De'Aaron Fox at Kentucky. Many believe he has a very good chance to be the starting 2 guard. I understand that completely. I think there's going to be a major position battle in training camp between Malik Monk and Kevin Huerter for that starting 2 spot. But there's others that look at Huerter as a good backup 3 right now that almost serves as a little bit of collateral, or almost serves as like a safety net in the event that Harrison Barnes does walk at the end of the season. Or if you want to trade Barnes at the trade deadline, you have a starting 3 caliber player in Kevin Huerter waiting right behind. Where do you think, just based off your understanding of Kevin Huerter, not so much the Sacramento Kings, how do you think the Kings should use him or optimize him the most? Is it as that kind of backup 3 role, or is it as a starting 2?
Yeah, interesting. I think that Huerter primarily is a 2 for me. I think that if you look up and down his profile, he's played a lot more 2 than 3 in his career. He's got enough length to be a small forward in the NBA at 6'7", but he's pretty skinny. He's not the most physical guy in the world. He's gotten a little bit stronger as his career has gone on, but rebounding wise, he's definitely not good for a 3. He's probably below average for a 2 as a rebounder. And then defensively, I actually think that he's underrated defensively. I think there's this stigma out there in part because he's a skinny white guy who's a shooter, probably. But it's one of those things where I think Huerter is an acceptable defender at this point. I think he's kind of just okay. He's not great, but he has some strengths and weaknesses. But at the 3, he is a little bit slight of frame to be doing that on a full-time basis. I think, in a lot of schemes, the 2 and 3 are pretty much the same these days. But I think what you don't want to have him happen is have him be the only guy who can cover a big physical 3 on the other team necessarily defensively. But I think he does have the size that you want as a playmaker. He's probably underrated too. He's a good passer, good ball mover, and obviously the shooting is his number 1 appeal. I think it would make sense for me to either start him at the 2 or have him sort of as that functional, third wing type that can do a lot of different things. That might be his best role. I think he's a starting caliber player. But on a lot of teams, he'd be better as a third wing who can kind of do a little bit of both. Him against Malik Monk is pretty interesting to me. I think that Huerter's probably a better player, but it's one of those things where what do you want from that spot? Monk is more of that heat up scorer, where Huerter is not the most aggressive guy all the time, but he's got a little bit more of a well-rounded game. He's a better defender than Monk is, for instance, obviously more size. A pretty interesting sort of what you want kind of hypothetical from the Kings. But if you don't start him at the 2, I think he'd be used to that as well. He's come off the bench a lot in Atlanta. He ended up starting for most of last season because they kind of found out that Bogdanovich was better off the bench in some ways with their roster construction. But he's not a guy who's going to make a gripe either. If he gets there and he's a third wing, he'll be comfortable with that. Great locker room guy, etc. So he's definitely a versatile piece, which is part of his appeal.
Quick pause here as I tell you about a great sponsor of the Locked On Kings podcast, BetOnline, your number 1 source for all your betting needs and sports information. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including Major League Baseball happening right now. And there's so many fun bets about landing destinations for Kyrie Irving, for Kevin Durant. Maybe you made money off of who the Sacramento Kings selected 4th overall. Did you make money off the Kings selecting Keegan Murray? Did you make a boatload of money with Jabari Smith Jr. sliding to the Houston Rockets at 3? I guarantee if you bet on that, you significantly cashed in. That's just examples of some of the fun year-round that you can have betting on the NBA on BetOnline. They're your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, and that includes MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action at BetOnline, where the game starts. I think it's his potential on the defensive end, or his already being better than Malik Monk on the defensive end, that might end up winning him that spot. Because both he and Malik Monk are around 40% three-point shooters. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Kevin Huerter was close to a 42%. He was between 41 42% catch and shoot three-point shooter last season, which theoretically, playing with both De'Aaron Fox and Sabonis a majority of his minutes, he's going to get a lot of catch and shoot, kick out 3 opportunities. I mean, it's clear the Kings are prioritizing shooting. They've gone out in this offseason and gotten 4 nearly 40% or over 40% three-point shooters to surround their 2 stars who aren't necessarily known for their shooting. But also they brought in head coach Mike Brown because this team has been horrendous defensively for nearly 2 decades. And they recognize that as good as if they're a top 10 offense, but the 25th or 26th worst defense, they're still probably a team that finishes 15 games under 500. So Kevin Huerter might make more sense in Mike Brown's system as a starter, because he might have to pick up a little bit of the slack of defending in the backcourt, which has never necessarily been a strength of De'Aaron Fox. I think De'Aaron is capable of playing good defense. He hasn't always wanted to, and I don't know Mike Brown is going to be able to get De'Aaron to buy into that. I hope so. I think Malik Monk is also coming into Sacramento. I've read that he wants to prove that he can be a better defender than he's shown in his career. So maybe it might end up being defense between the 2, Huerter versus Monk, in training camp, in addition to their shooting that we know they can both provide, that makes one rise above the other and earn that spot.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I think Huerter is a quality defender, not going to change your life. I'm not going to tell you that he's going to be this game-wrecking defender on the wing, but I think that he has a reputation that was probably unearned from when he was earlier in his career. Like, there's always been this, can he play with Trae Young? Can those guys play together because of the defense? Because clearly Trey's not very good defensively. That's not a secret. And I always thought it was a little bit unfair to Kevin Huerter. I think he's a pretty solid defender. He's pretty active too. He's pretty long. A good team defender too. Like knows how to play on the help side. All those things. And I think that also a little bit more size wouldn't be the worst thing in the world compared to Malik Monk. And honestly, in an archetypal way, I'm sure you discussed Malik Monk a lot on your show already, but he just feels like a third guard to me. Like he's the prototypical like 6th, 7th man guard. Come in, shoot a lot, make a lot of threes. And that's not a criticism. That's a valuable piece. But I think that's what he is to me, especially next to a guy like De'Aaron Fox. You're pretty small if you're playing Malik Monk next to him. All that stuff. I'm sure I'll let you handle most of the King stuff on Malik Monk, but it is one of those things where it does feel like a more natural fit to go ahead and start Kevin Huerter because he's just so well-rounded. He does so many things well without taking too much off the table. Because really, weakness-wise, there isn't much there. Like maybe rebounding, maybe defending against bigger guys, but Huerter just kind of checks a lot of different boxes. And he's not like elite at anything other than shooting, but he really does kind of give you a lot of little things that can plug in between guys who are high usage, like Fox, like Sabonis.
I'm curious, what are your thoughts or questions or expectations even for both Justin Holiday and Mo Harkless, who went to Atlanta in this deal? Are you looking at them both as, and are the Hawks, because they're trying to win right now, they're not rebuilding, are the Hawks looking at both of them as potential contributors, just Justin Holiday, not so much Mo Harkless? He was just money added in on the deal, because I think both of them can help in their own way. Justin Holiday more than Mo Harkless. I know Kings fans weren't necessarily sad to see Justin Holiday go because his stint here in Sacramento wasn't the most impressive, but I also would have been just fine from a Kings perspective of Sacramento holding on to Justin. I believe, like you said earlier, he would have been an NBA role player and would have been at very least a contributor for the Sacramento Kings.
Yeah, I was going to ask you this as well. I'll kind of put it back to you after I give you what I think, and then you can tell me what you think from the Kings side. I haven't seen, because I know looking at the numbers and what he was not quite the same guy he usually has been with the Kings, which I'm sure left a little bit of a sour taste in Sacramento. But zooming out a little bit, I think that the Hawks are certainly doing this deal with the assumption that Justin Holiday is going to be a rotation wing for them, and give them a little bit more defensive punch. He's a better defender than Huerter is. Even with all I've said about Huerter, I think Holiday's a better defender than he is. A little bit worse, obviously, offensively, not as good of a shooter, but a willing shooter, a guy who has taken, I don't know, I think he's been taking 6 or 7 threes per game the last couple seasons. He's willing to shoot. And I think that it's a different organization now, but, I know Travis Schlenk was in Golden State when Holiday was there back in the day, long time ago, as the Hawks president of basketball operations. And obviously he was with Atlanta briefly previously. I think that they're really kind of that was part of the emphasis to do this deal. And my understanding is that they know that they can plug and play Justin Holiday. He played for Nate McMillan also in Indiana. So there's a familiarity there. I think he's the guy that they're more like banking on being a contributor for this season. Not going to start for them. It's obviously going to be Murray and DeAndre Hunter as the 2 and the 3 coming in. They also have Bogdanovich. So he's kind of in this 4th wing role, which is probably what he should be in. That's kind of what he probably is at this point. But they definitely think that that's a positive for this season. He's on that 1-year expiring contract. He should help them. As for Harkless, I think it's kind of a throw in to make the money work, but also the Hawks were in need of a veteran kind of plug and play, low cost, low usage power forward option in particular, because even with Collins on the roster, they have a guy named Jalen Johnson, who was their 1st-round pick last year, and I think that he'll probably get those minutes that Gallinari was playing with the Hawks previously. But having another guy kind of in that Solomon Hill role for Hawks fans, 2 years ago it was Solomon Hill, that like veteran, just doesn't need a lot of usage. Obviously, he's not a great shooter. Mo Harkless is not a good shooter at this point, but he's a guy who can defend, do the little things, not have to play if he doesn't want to play. And also, if they need to flip him to save money or get under the luxury tax, they can probably just do that, and it won't kill them. I think he's kind of a throw in to make the money work, but also a guy who could be providing some use. Does that sound about right from your side, having watched those guys more than I have the last few months?
Yeah, I think you're bang on with Mo Harkless in the sense that I think Mo, every once in a while, Mo can step up and have good games for you. He got a lot of opportunity as a starter when Luke Walton was still here. The problem was he never capitalized as a shooter enough to make that a net positive. Defensively, he was one of the better defenders on the Kings, which again isn't saying much. But I think defensively, Mo Harkless can provide you some solid minutes, and with his length and size, his versatility, you can play him at the 3, you can play him at the 4. So he's not a bad piece to have. Plus, he's a hard worker, a good teammate, a good locker room leader. Justin Holiday, though, is where I agree with you. The money is going to be made in this trade. If there's going to be any kind of immediate impact player, it's going to come from Justin Holiday. And what's interesting is in Sacramento, I think Justin played differently than he naturally would and is supposed to. Like Justin came into Sacramento, essentially replaced Buddy Hield as the starting 2 guard, even though we didn't understand why he was starting over Dante DiVincenzo. And Justin embraced the Buddy Hield role in Sacramento, which was, okay, every time the ball is in my hands, I'm going to put it up. Anytime I have a good look from the perimeter, I'm going to put it up. And fans were already with bad shot fatigue after Buddy Hield and the years that we dealt with that with Buddy Hield, but at least every once in a while, Buddy would make some of those bad shots. Justin Holiday couldn't hit the broadside of the barn for a lot of the time that he was here in Sacramento. However, I still believe that Justin playing in his role off the bench as a bench defender and then that 3-and-D type scorer who can hit a couple 3-pointers for you a game. Like, I think if Justin Holiday wants to take 4 3-pointers a game off the bench, I have no issue with that. I don't think anybody should have any issue with that. When he's getting into the 6, 7, or 8 per game territory, you're probably a volume shooter on a bad basketball team, which is what he was in Sacramento. So fans kind of soured on him quickly because he wasn't hitting shots and the Buddy Hield fatigue in my mind. But I think Justin Holiday can be an excellent contributor for any team. I think if Atlanta knows how to use him correctly, and you mentioned the connection with Nate McMillan, so he's more familiar with him than you or anybody else is in Sacramento. So he'll know how to maximize him, I think, in a rotation role. And with a team like Atlanta who likes to shoot the basketball, likes to get up and down the floor, I think Justin can if at the very least fit in and understand how to be effective.
Yeah, the Hawks definitely have a use for catch and shoot 3-and-D guy on the wing. You know, he doesn't have to create shots. They have Trae Young. They have DeJounte Murray to do that. They don't really necessarily need him to do that. And even zooming out, obviously, this includes the Sacramento sample, but the last 4 seasons combined, he's shooting 37% from 3 on almost 6 attempts per game. Like, that's a pretty good shooter. He's not Kevin Huerter. He's not an elite shooter, but if he's open, you want him to shoot it, and it'll go in enough to justify it. And for me, the big thing is that they wanted one more defensive wing. Because if you factor in the fact that, you know, Murray is a little bit small at the 2, obviously he's a really good point guard defender, but you throw in Bogdanovich, who has lost a step or 2 defensively in the last couple seasons. They need another guy who can play defense on the wing. And I think that they were always going to acquire that guy some way, somehow. And I think getting Holiday as part of this deal, they don't do this deal if it's not a guy that they think they can at least use. Obviously, the first round pick is a nice carrot to get Kevin Huerter back and to sort of restock that first round cupboard after trading a bunch for DeJounte Murray. But if they didn't believe that Holiday could be a rotation player for them, they don't do this trade. I don't think. So that's part of the carrot here as well.
Today's episode of Locked On Kings brought to you by our friends over at RockAuto, the #1 place to buy car parts and ultimately save yourselves a boatload of money. Look, anytime something goes wrong with your car, it's like, oh, this is going to be extremely expensive. It's more the fear of the expense that's the hassle than the actual broken part on your car. Hell, everything's expensive with a car right now, including gas. My goodness, it costs so much money just to fill up your car. Well, rockauto.com can't necessarily help you with that, but if anything goes wrong with your car, they can save you a boatload of money while getting you the parts that you need. I'm talking about 30, 50, or even 100% more savings than your chain auto parts store or even your dealership. If you have the ability to look at a bunch of different part brands, different price points, other than being stuck at their set price point at the local chain auto parts store. And an example for you is like a Honda Odyssey fuel pump, $353 at your local chain store, $216 from RockAuto. RockAuto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Their prices are reliably low for every single customer. They have everything you could need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet, and so much more. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now, see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Well, I don't think they got one wing defender. I think honestly they got 2. Like that's the biggest strength of Mo Harkless's wing defense. He's just probably not going to provide too much for you on the offensive end. So you can plug in either of those guys at that role if you need some stops or if you're defending a team with one of those big versatile wings. I think Mo Harkless had some really good moments over the last couple seasons or season and some change with Sacramento, defending some of the longer wings that the Kings typically have struggles with. It's just he was such a net negative on the defense or on the offensive end of the floor that it didn't justify him getting the minutes that I think the Sacramento Kings wanted to rely on him with as that primary wing defender. So I understand this trade for both sides. I think it's a definite immediate win for the Sacramento Kings, and I think the Kings are happy to pull the trigger on this deal knowing that. But like we talked about earlier, it's almost like Atlanta is investing in Sacramento. They get the opportunity to cash in with a maybe late lottery draft pick. Maybe they're even rooting for it to be a 13th pick in 2025 so that it's at least in the lottery. And then Mo Harkless and more Justin Holiday right now can still positively impact the team to try and get some wins and continue their playoff push and their build that they're on. And I love the DeJounte Murray deal for Atlanta. I'm a little concerned or confused with what the San Antonio Spurs are doing. They're going big time rebuild, which hey, I'm fine with in the Western Conference. One less team to worry about. But that pickup, I don't think has been talked about. Sure, I'm sure it has in Atlanta by yourself, but nationwide and certainly here in Sacramento, that DeJounte Murray pickup for Atlanta has not been talked about enough. I think that's going to be a massive deal for the Hawks.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that justifiably there's a lot of attention paid on the price tag because they paid a lot. I mean, they gave up a lot of draft capital for DeJounte Murray. And I'm not someone who I was not bashing it, but it was my duty, as you well know, to point out the fact that look, there's a lot of downside risk here for the Hawks.
Yeah.
But on the higher side, you're getting a really good, even conservatively, like one of the top 40 player in the league, probably. I mean, you could sort of qualm with him being an all-star this year. He was injury replacement, all that stuff. But in the press release, you can include all-star guard DeJounte Murray, and that's a huge thing as well. But yeah, I think that's going to be huge for them. He helps them offensively. He helps them defensively. He checks all the boxes the Hawks were looking for and opens up what the trade that we're talking about now. Like this Kevin Huerter deal probably does not happen without DeJounte Murray on the roster. Could the Hawks have traded Kevin Huerter without getting DeJounte Murray? Yes, I think Huerter was going to be available, but this particular construction, I don't think happens without the DeJounte Murray trade being a part of the sort of process, getting all the way from start to finish and having the Hawks get that sort of breathing room at the two guard spot. And yeah, it's to bring it full circle. I think the fact that what you and I will probably be talking about that first round pick for the next 2 or 3 seasons as to where it conveys, because it really is. It's so funny, and I don't mean to boil it down to just that, but if that trade is Holiday Harkless in 2 seconds for Kevin Huerter, it's a heist for the Kings.
Yeah.
If it's Holiday Harkless in a first round pick, it's more appropriate, I think, and it even potentially could be a win for the Hawks just because of what that pick might be. If that pick, like you said, is the 13th pick in the draft, that's really good value for what they traded for Kevin Huerter. Even as a guy who I am very high, I think people hopefully can notice this on your side of things on Sacramento, but I think Kevin Huerter is a good player. I think he's an underrated player. And by the way, that's a good contract. That's especially with the cap going up and the way that it is, to get a starting caliber wing for probably even sub starter money on the current landscape for 4 seasons and basically his early to mid prime. That's a really good deal on the surface, which kind of sweetens things for Sacramento's side. So I think it can be a win-win. It really can.
Yeah, it's usually the team that takes the best player in the deal that is taking more of the risk. In this situation, it feels like the Atlanta Hawks gave up the best player and are also taking the risk with how this pick conveys.
That is the downside for sure. I think, generally speaking, any trade, you want to get the best player. That's one of those old rules. And the Kings are getting the best player in the deal. So if you're a Kings fan, that's the solace for you. If you're a Hawks fan, maybe Holiday helps you on defense, and hopefully that first round pick arrives to kind of boost what you've given up in the Murray trade. So it's certainly one of those. I'm not trying to grade it, honestly. It's one of those like TBD draft grade kind of. It was just like the least sexy thing you could possibly say on a podcast. It's like, okay, can't grade this one until 2026, but it really is part of that too.
Well, Sacramento appreciates the investment from Atlanta, I can tell you that much. And we are both rooting for the same thing. We're rooting for the Sacramento Kings to be good enough in 2024 so the Kings happily will send that pick Atlanta's way. But we'll have to wait and see. Brad, we're always seemingly trade partners in situations like this. I'm sure at the trade deadline, somehow we'll come together again to talk about some hypothetical deal, or hell, maybe an actual deal will go down. Who knows? And I'm still closely following the John Collins sweepstakes. I don't know if the Kings are still interested or not, but Collins seems like he's forever on the trade block. So we'll see what happens over there. You, of course, will have that covered with the Locked On Hawks podcast. I appreciate you, my man. Looking forward to doing this again in the near future, and wish you and your Hawks the best of luck this season. Hopefully I'll see you in Las Vegas.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be on the scene, and enjoy Kevin Huerter, a guy that I really enjoyed covering as well. A good guy by all accounts. I've always liked talking to him, and he's fun to watch. So Kings fans are in for a treat with him.
Huge thank you to Brad for joining me here on Locked On Kings. Always good to talk to him, and it'll be interesting to see how this deal works out for both sides. Really, like we said there at the end, if it works for the Sacramento Kings, if things are going well for the Kings, then things are probably going pretty well for the Hawks in the sense that they're getting that draft pick. That first round pick is actually conveying and it doesn't become 2 second rounders. But Brad is 100% right. If for some reason this trade fails, it's bad for the Sacramento Kings, obviously, if they're not making the improvements they're expected to make, if they're not a playoff team by 2020, I think it was 6, and this becomes 2 second round picks. It's a steal of the deal for Sacramento, but we're not feeling very good about it because obviously the Kings still are struggling to make the playoffs and we're beyond 20 years at that point. And let's pray to God that that does not happen. But like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be in Vegas for Summer League. So if you're heading out there, please let me know. Would love to meet up with you at one of the Kings games. Also, I was at the Chase Center. I did a podcast, a little tiny podcast over the weekend from the Chase Center on Saturday after game 1 of the California Classic. I was not there yesterday for game 2. That's why I didn't do a podcast for you. I know Keegan Murray struggled a bit in game 2, but still the Kings were able to win and Keegan did some good things. I'm going to talk about game 2 and game 3, which is on Tuesday night's episode of Locked On Kings. Once the Kings are finished playing the Los Angeles Lakers, I believe, to wrap up the California Classic, I'm going to do an episode tomorrow that will basically sum up the Classic as a whole. Those final 2 games, we'll look at Keegan Murray, we'll look at Keon Ellis, who did really, really well yesterday. We'll talk about Nehemias Queta and anybody else who stands up, and also talk about how this team looks going into Las Vegas. So I'm looking forward to doing that. Plus, I'm planning on having Kyle Tucker from The Athletic back with me here on Locked On Kings. He covers Kentucky basketball. I had him on to talk about Shaedon Sharpe during the draft process. Now I'm going to have him on to talk about the Malik Monk, De'Aaron Fox, Kentucky backcourt that he covered in their time there. Now they're reuniting here in Sacramento, so I'm interested to hear Kyle's thoughts on that. So I hope you will have, or you'll stick around when he joins me for that later on this week. So much great content still coming for you here this offseason on Locked On Kings. Appreciate your support as always. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode, and have yourself a very happy and safe 4th of July. Don't blow yourself up. And if you live near me, stop firing off fireworks after 11 o'clock and waking my baby up, please. I'm begging you at this point. Please don't do that. Hope you have a great 4th of July. We'll talk to you next time. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.